Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. Today we talk with Pamela Stokes Eggleston, who is the former co-executive director of Yoga Service Council, and she is also on the board of directors of Accessible Yoga. She has so many degrees, MBA, MS, CIYT, just a magnificent woman, a published author, a consultant, a national speaker, an advisor. And she also is the spouse of a veteran. So in our talk today, we talked about her chapter in the new book that has just come out called Yoga and Resilience, Empowering Practices for Survivors of Sexual Trauma, edited by Danielle Rousseau. And, we talk about Pamela's chapter in the book, chapter number 13, and how being a sexual survivor when you have actually been abused in the military, what that looks like. We talk through a case study that she's had and what are the expectations that people can have when they work with a yoga therapist. How is it different than working with a talk therapist or a psychologist? And so I found this fascinating because it's kind of mirroring what's happening in society, that we each have this personal internal work to do to learn how to self-regulate, to learn how to cope with all of the stress in our life and the trauma that we've experienced. And in this case, the sexual trauma that was experienced. But there's also these structural and systemic things that need to change in society. So we cannot separate that internal work that we're each doing from the external work that is happening out there. Meaning taking our yoga off the mat, becoming a social justice warrior. And Pamela and I, we don't hold back in this one. We're both very strong women who have very strong opinions that yoga is not just for exercise, although it is a great exercise. It's much more than that. When we practice our yamas and our niyamas, how do we bring our whole self to the table of life? And how do we get on board with these structural changes that are already happening in society and will continue to happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years as we're working as yoga therapists? And what does it mean to figure out who you are, what you stand for, what your values are? Are you willing to speak your truth? That's part of being a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist. And although we may not agree on everything, and that's okay, each of us has to do that deep internal work. In addition, one of the things that we talk about is how to get involved in a place like the Veterans Administration and do this work with our military service members. For instance, at the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, we have taken the time to apply for something called MyCAA, which basically, once you do all the paperwork, which is not easy, it takes quite a bit of effort, but we now can give scholarships to any military spouse that falls within certain categories. Let me tell you what those categories are. That is E1 to E4, military spouses, W1 and W2, and O1, O2. We basically can give free training to people because the military is willing to pay for that when someone who's a military spouse applies for MyCAA. So that type of program needs to start permeating every yoga teacher training school, every yoga therapy school, so that basically the schools can be sustained. I mean, imagine if you got 40 people that you were being paid to teach, but also it brings yoga, trauma therapy, mental health yoga, yoga therapy to a population that desperately needs us. And so it's a win-win-win for everyone involved. So we talked in this episode a little bit about that journey and basically how Pamela had become a consultant to the VA and what that was like, how much paperwork is required, and the journey of helping military spouses and military members to heal from everything from race-based trauma to medical trauma to sexual trauma. There's a whole lot going on with people who are affiliated with the military. So we start off with that, and then we weave our way into social justice issues, which Pamela is so excited about and a leader in our field, and how, again, what's happening inside of me is very, very connected to the structures that we live in and how things are crumbling. And we have to be part of that change. We have to accept that responsibility and bring it forward. And we're perfectly designed to do that as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And I also want to encourage you, if you've been loving the podcast, to go to your podcast platform, whether it's Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you listen, and give us a review. We need reviews. That helps us keep going, and it helps us spread the word to more people. So thank you for listening. And now we go to Pamela Stokes Eggleston. Hello, Pamela Stokes Eggleston. I am so happy to have you here on the podcast. We are both very busy women, and it wasn't easy to get us scheduled. And I'm just so pleased that you're here. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to be here.
So I just want to start by telling our audience a little bit about you. You have an MBA, an MS, you're a CIAYT, you're an ERYT 500, and a YSEP, meaning you offer continuing education units. Mm-hmm. You're the founder of Yoga to Sleep. You're the co-founder of Retreat to Spirit. You're on the clinic staff for yoga therapy at the Department of Maryland University of Integrative Health. You're a consultant, an advisor, a published author, a national speaker. You've worked for substance abuse and mental health services in the Veterans Administration and the Department of Labor, which we're going to talk a little bit today about the VA and the military and your history there. You've been an advisor to Congress on substance abuse and mental health and criminal justice and military and veteran family matters. You've also recently been a contributing editor to Yoga and Resilience. It's a book that's edited by Danielle Rousseau, and I actually wrote the foreword.
Yes.
I love this book. So it's Yoga and Resilience, Empowering Practices for Survivors of Sexual Trauma. And I was blown away when I saw this book. I almost cried. I thought, wow, it is so well done. I think everyone needs to read this book. Mm-hmm. So let's start there.
Great.
Your chapter 13. Mm-hmm. Tell us, how that was for you writing a chapter about surviving military sexual trauma.
Well,
not necessarily that you did, but
right.
You are an expert in that area.
Right. Well, the way that process was in compiling that book is when Amina and I were executive or co-executive directors of the Yoga Service Collective, we actually, the way that they pull together for these books. So this is a book in a series, right? There's best practices for the criminal justice system, best practices for yoga with veterans, of which I was a senior contributor on, best practices for yoga in schools. And so the process is you bring these contributors, these folks who are working in the space, to Omega Institute for a week, and you just are like brain dumping, like culling and brain dumping and using your expertise and pulling all this information together. And then we go back home and then we're processing, writing and things like that. So the authors of chapters take the lead in really pulling together all of the information, writing it. And then with Dr. Rousseau editing and going back and forth and editing it. So she had a huge job in, herding cats to write each of the chapters. I had experience in working with clients with military sexual trauma as a yoga therapist, and even before I was a CIAYT, right? So many of my clients, I'll say most, were women veterans, some of whom assumed I was a veteran because I was so, I knew so much about it. I was like, no, I'm married to a veteran, but I'm not one myself. But I had enough knowledge and compassion and was able to create a brave space, a brave container for which they could feel comfortable with me as a yoga therapy client to come to me and share this information. And so I had been working as a VA vendor to get clients for a while. And really, I had to kind of put that on hold before I went to get my master's in yoga therapy at MUIH, because it was a lot. The paperwork was a lot, just getting clients, trying to navigate that. I learned a lot about insurance and getting an NPI number. Marlisa Sullivan was helpful in, helping me process with some of that, but it was kind of arduous, but I enjoyed the actual time I had with the clients. And I learned a lot about military sexual trauma through that. Even prior to that, many women would just come to me and share their stories like this. And when I tell you it was complex, it was continuous. So it wasn't just one, oh, here, this happened over here because your leader did this, and it was different scenarios.
And how prevalent would you say that is for women in the military? I mean, are we talking 50% of women experience that, 70%, 90%?
I don't know. What I do know is I don't know what the percentages are. What I know is the folks that came to me was about 75%. Now, I don't know if that's because people felt comfortable with me. Many of the women vets that came to me were African American or Latinx. So many of them had been traumatized prior to joining the military. So you come in, so you're talking about that complex trauma.
Yeah.
And then whatever PTSD comes out of that. And then you go into the military where they weren't addressing any of it. Even though they say, well, we're doing these mental health checks, and what are you doing? I really don't ever know what that looks like, especially for women.
Right.
And so there's layers to that. There's layers to the trauma. And that's why I really knew the charge that I had, because I knew that this was a book, irrespective of whatever came out. Like, that chapter needed to at least be tight and hold up for at least another 5 years after it came out. Of course, things change, right? Information changes. But I wanted it to, as we put the best practices into it, be able to hold up to its weight in any other trauma program that people would use the book in as they were talking about these issues. So this is something that I think with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement has become more, I'll say, illuminated, because the thing has been there.
And it reminds me of these situations where yoga gives us the ability to have internal coping skills to deal with complex trauma and all sorts of other things. But there's also this structural problem. And we see this in racism. We see this in all sorts of areas in our world right now, where we can teach people how to internally monitor and self-regulate, but there's still a structural problem that exists. And we need to work on both of those levels. It's one of the things I hear you saying.
Yeah, there has to be the all angles. It's the and both analogy. It's the and both thing, right? You cannot say, well, there's no victim blaming. I hear less, but I still see this, unfortunately, from older women who have gone through things. Well, we just went through it. That was back in our day. And so this is the way it was. You would go to a job and you would do this and this would happen, and you either dealt with it or you left the job. That's not the answer, honey. That's not the answer.
Don't get me started, Pamela.
Right. Just because you're a certain and you dealt with it, shouldn't you want somebody that comes behind you? And this is what I understand about women in general, and whatever feminism, womanism looks like. shouldn't you want somebody to come behind you, have a better chance at it, to not have to worry about that? Not to just throw your hands up and say, oh, well, this is the way it's always been done. That's the argument. That's why you see structures crumbling. There's no, oh, this is happening more and more now. No, there's just, as Will Smith said, there's just cameras. You know, George Floyd, there's just cameras now. Didn't happen. We, meaning Black and brown people, have been saying this. And saying this and saying, now that we have cameras and you see it, what you going to do? You know, are you going to pretend you don't see it? Because that's the other thing that I feel like that energy is taking place. You know, oh, well, I won't look at it. Doesn't mean it's not happening, you know, because you don't want to see the thing. Now, in terms of George Floyd, I didn't look at that video. I have not seen it. Well, especially when it was 8 minutes and 4, and then they were like, no, actually it was 9 minutes and 30. I was like, you know, I'm not going to watch this snuff film. I'm not. I know this happens. Yeah. You know, and I'm not going to.
That's traumatizing.
Yeah.
To be a Black or brown person and watch that for 9 minutes.
I knew enough people that had watched it and they told me this would happen. You know, I did not want to have that in my body. And maybe I'll change my mind and down the road I'll watch it, but I haven't. And I said, I mean, I saw clips because you can't help that.
Yeah.
And Chauvin's eyes. And I said, oh, he's comfortable. He's done this before. Now, I know that look, you know, oh, this isn't the first time. He's done it and he's gotten away with it, which is why he looked shocked when they held him out to jail. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
What's a bad apple? There are no bad apples. It's just the orchard is bad.
There's so much work to be done. And of course, yoga therapy is amazing at this personal level, but I think this kind of brings us to, why are we healing ourselves from the inside out, or attempting to, so that we can do good in the world and we can have social justice and we can work towards a better future for ourselves and our children. Like that's kind of strange for me when people don't see that connection, that it's not just about me blissing out. It's about, okay, now I've healed enough to be able to make a difference for those future generations, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all still on our journeys doing the work. And so we're at different points in that voyage, whereby there are little hints of illumination and knowledge, and that I'm going to sit with that. When that illumination or knowledge goes against everything I've been told, which, if you're following yoga, the yogic path is often.
Yep.
That's when we need to pause and sit in meditation. That's when we need to pause and think about, what pranayama am I going to practice before meditation or before asana or during asana? What does my daily practice look like? And I'd venture to say, Amy, people that are in the space where we work, where we live, where we're doing this yoga therapy, need to really look at what their daily practices are on the mat and off. So a lot of people in the space are like, well, it's me, right? I feel better. Yoga saved my life. I have this yoga butt. I have a yoga body now. All of this, I'm like, are we missing? I have never, and this is just me personally, I've never used yoga as an exercise. Yoga is yoga. And by that, I mean all the things.
All the 8 limbs.
All the 8 limbs. Okay. And then I go for a walk, go for a bike ride, do what I'm going to do. This is the exercise, like for me. And so, which is why I always felt weird about when people would say, oh, this gym is opening. And this is me personally, right? Because I understand we have to do what we have to do and work where we need to work. When a gym would say, oh, you can teach this yoga at a gym, I'm like, I have to teach asana there. I'm going to be teaching asana, and which is, they should just start saying, this is asana, and stop saying it's yoga. But I digress. I couldn't do it. It always fell through. It was always, I don't feel good about it, or the money was short, or whatever. Right. So I never did it. And I don't think I'm ever going to do that, because I feel like this is spiritual path. This is an awakening, opening, spacious path of illumination and samadhi, right? That we are moving towards. And to do that, it is uncomfortable at times. So if there is a racist uncle in your, or hell, if it's your dad, right, who's racist, who's like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not wearing my mask, everything is politicized. And what is your practice looking like to be able to communicate with somebody like that?
Right.
As opposed to just, well, I'm just not going to talk to him anymore, which a lot of my friends, listen, they're not talking to their family members because they're like, after a while, I'm not going to keep hitting the wall. People like that who don't have a practice, who don't know this space, I do have more compassion for because they don't have the tools. Even if they are racist. Now, they're not coming to my house, if they want to start.
You have your boundaries.
Right. If they want to start something, I'm going to finish it. As my mother would say, I'll finish it, but I understand that is the compassion piece. I understand, but I don't have to like it. I don't have to love it. And so we need to get to a place, if we're in this space, if we are healed enough, as you say, to be able to hold that in our hearts without having it consume us.
That's the goal, right?
Right.
To stay in that sattvic, semi-sattvic place while you do the work.
Yes.
I mean, we're not cave yogis. We are out in the world, interacting, getting our work done.
Doing that householder stuff, right?
Yep.
I'd love to be renunciant for a month or whatever, and just go. I mean, I don't want to pay bills and all of that stuff, but we have to understand that we are out in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want to take you all the way back to this book before we move on into some of these other areas, because you have a case study in this book that I'd just like you to talk a little bit about, because it's a fascinating case study. And it also ties into trauma and racism and inability to sleep and anxiety. So can you just tell us about this case study and just kind of outline it for us?
Well, yes. So that person was a yoga therapy client that came to me through the VA, even though I had met her years ago. And when I was writing that chapter, I went to her, I was like, okay, I have a couple of clients and I know she was dealing with some things. And she said, of course, I'll definitely give you something, because she's able to speak to her experience and share her story. She is a Nigerian American, and she came to this country and served her country. Now, that in and of itself is a mic drop, right? Like, nobody has to do that. So she did that. And she had these experiences in the military, and she's a disabled veteran right now.
So because of her military sexual trauma?
Because of the trauma and because of some other things while she was serving, right? So working through that, using therapy, i.e. the mental health piece, like we're using that Manomaya kosha as we process some of the stuff, I was able to open that space up for her. Like, therapy is great. She knew that she needed more, because in her former life, she had done meditation, right?
Okay.
So she kind of reached out, and I was like, well, you have to go through the VA. I needed, because I have to get the paperwork through them, all of that stuff. To watch her blossom from the time that I initially saw her to who she is as a woman now has been miraculous. Even, I'll say at the point of where we ended in the chapter in the book to now has been miraculous. Like, it is actually her calling. She's actually starting to teach yoga. She's actually, doing more for her body. She's looking at Ayurveda and understanding how foods affect her body, and to live in the sensation of her body, recognizing that it's a beautiful gift. And when often you're suppressing, right, because of the things that happen. So to be able to break through that, and I did that with her through breath, through movement. She was actually I don't know if it was about a year or so ago now, maybe 2 years, attacked on the metro here in the DC area. Attacked. They didn't know she was a veteran, and she's like, the way that she handled that, she wouldn't have done that before me. In terms of breathing, in terms of, I'm giving her these tools, like just pause and breathe, just pause. When people come at you, just pause instead of jumping, and then breathe, and then say what you're going to say. And who cares if people see you pausing and breathing? That's what I tell a lot of these clients. Oh, they're going to see me doing this. I don't want to do the naughty shoulder with the, and I was like, you could do that. You can imagine closing one nostril off, and you don't have to use your hand, but if you want to, you can do it. Who cares, right? Like if you feel like doing it, right? So she's been an amazing testimony to.
And was she doing talk therapy with the psychologist this whole time also?
She was doing it in spurts. So she wasn't, because I had seen her, at the beginning she was, and she is now. Actually, it was kind of sporadic during the time that I was seeing her consistently. What I could do, though, was tie into what she was doing, kind of this mental health thing that you spoke to earlier before we came on this podcast, and how we can look at the monomyia koshas. So as I was going through the koshas from gross to subtle with her, in allowing for that sensation, also asking her, would she consider different types of therapies? Because I feel like yoga therapy is complementary. Right. She's still going to her doctor's appointments. She was starting to go back to a therapist on a regular basis, which we had talked about. Because initially, I think she had gone to a CBT therapist, which many, I'm just going to say from my experience, because I don't want anybody to come after me, military service members of African descent who have had some trauma say that is not working for them.
And just to be clear, that's cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm. Because they're drudging up the thing, right? So you're talking about it, and then you're going to say, well, what? You're going to drudge it up.
Yeah.
And
that can deepen the samskara, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the samskara is deepened, and where's the container? Like once the thing comes out, who is the person, the therapist, holding the container for the stuff to come up? That
in an embodied way. That's where I think yoga therapy. It's one thing to have a container from your neck up in your head and think your way through it, but that is not going to heal us.
No, it's not.
As much as the container of, this is my body. These are the sensations. Here's what's arising in me. Here's how I can shift that so it's not quite so painful.
Right. The issues are in the tissues.
Yeah.
And there's cultural implications.
Tell us about
that. Our Black bodies have been, commodified. I mean, look at the gymnast recently, talking about her mental health.
Yeah.
Simone Biles.
Yep.
Everybody coming at her with vitriol. Well, that's a commodification of a Black body, period. That's what was happening in slavery. It looks different. The face looks different. Yep. And that's what happened. And when she got the support, I was like, I am here for you. You don't have to do a damn thing. When Naomi Osaka was like, yeah, I'm good at the French Open.
Loving these young women with the strength and courage to say, you will not commodify me.
You will not. And I don't need you to know, I'll pay this fine. Yep. And I'm not going to talk to these press because they ask stupid questions. And who's watching these press coverages? I've never watched them. That's a sidebar. But I'm like, I don't give a damn. I want to see her play. And I want to see Simone, but I don't care about what she was thinking about when she got I did care about the twisties when she mentioned
exactly.
Herself in midair. I'm like, no one complaining about how she should have kept going has any idea what that's like. Please have several seats on that. So I am glad that these young Black women are deciding that they want to do that. And then I look at the strength and the tenacity of somebody like a Cori Bush, who did what she did for the unhoused, as she was unhoused herself in the midst of her trauma around that, right? And eviction, said, this is the right thing to do. I was kind of upset, like, she's in Congress, so why does she have to do it? So that was my logic mind saying, this is ridiculous. But I was happy that she did it because she knew she had to do it. So I'm looking at the strength and resiliency in a softer way. I'll say, not this, I'm strength, as opposed to my body being commodified, but I'm doing this and I'm going to take a break. I'm going to get back on the balance beam, right? Simone Biles did, but I'm going to take a break, and just so my team can at least get a medal. That's team. That's looking.
And I don't break my neck and get paralyzed for life, by the way.
Right, which has happened.
It's happened. And you know what? Everybody should have the body autonomy to decide what they do and don't want to do. And the rest of us should just be quiet.
Right. And I don't care what contracts you sign. This is where I don't care how much money's at stake. Listen, just because these so-called journalists want to interview somebody and ask them what went wrong, I don't give a. I mean, maybe it's because I ran track, and if you've been an athlete and you understand like that, what you're still trying to figure it out. So you don't need somebody rushing up in your face. Like you're like, okay, where was my mind? You're still trying to work through that. Right. So you don't need that. I'm happy that that's happening. I'm happy. And so I'm more interested in this sort of autonomy of our own bodies and being comfortable in our own bodies in the midst of the trauma that we've experienced, in the midst of the traumas being lodged in our adrenals, right? Or in our lungs, which happens, I believe, with a lot of PTSD clients I've seen, the shortness of breath where they are breathing right up in here and not in the diaphragm, not fully in the belly, but just really short, where you just see that the clavicle moving a little bit, really expressing, having that body express the breath, feel that expression, and therefore releasing trauma bit by bit.
Do you think the military has any, or let's say the VA, do they understand what you're talking about? Do they understand the issues are in the tissues? I mean, I've talked to Allison Whitehead and she seems totally on board and such a supporter of what we as yoga therapists do. She herself is a yoga therapist, CIAYT. But do you think there's hope in the military to get these messages across?
I do. And I love Allison, by the way, because she's in the thick of it. She's there. And she's got her finger on the pulse of what's happening there. And I think it's slow with any huge government conglomerate organizational structure. These movements take time to slowly come in and work. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I was able to get in there and do it. I had a lot of doors slammed in my face, though, initially.
I thought it was interesting what you said earlier, all the paperwork, get the number to submit the paper. Like so many people want insurance. They want to get paid through the VA or an organization but you end up spending 60% of your time, maybe you can correct me, figuring all that out. I mean, we were talking earlier, for our training programs, I signed up for something called MyCAA, which is basically, I'm putting it on the screen right now. It's a career advancement and scholarships through the Department of Defense for the spouses of military that are grades E1 to E5, W1, W2, and O1, O2. This took me 6 months to figure out how to get hooked up with the VA, get our school approved, send all the paperwork, figure out how to send the student to them, and then get the money back. I mean, I have a full 7 pages here of how to register, how to do it. And every time that we do it, it's hard. I mean, I love that we can now give scholarships, but it's a lot of work.
Right. It's a lot. However, I think that more people offering yoga therapy training or even 200-hour training should do that. They should apply for that because there are lots of people. I mean, even when I was I've worked with a couple of nonprofits, and I was a traveling yoga teacher with Hope for the Warriors. And I would go to Tampa, I would go to some smaller, more remote bases. And there was always this interest of, I do this, or I've practiced yoga, but I've only practiced vinyasa, or I'd hear that kind of conversation. I'm like, well, but it's doing something else, right? The yoga, it's helping your body, but you feel that little magic going on. And they're like, yeah, I want to take a training, but this, and this. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that your school, Optimal State, is a member of MyCAA. And I would encourage other schools to sign up for that.
Absolutely. I mean, it takes time, it takes effort. I talked a little bit.
Dealing with the VA or DOD or any of those places is going to take you some time.
But now we have it, and I could bring 40 people in on scholarship if they heard about it. Like, it's unlimited. It's a way to get help for veterans, their families.
Absolutely.
It's a way to help people who normally might not be able to spend on a teacher training. Like there's so many positives that come from that effort if you can get through that system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm happy. I'm so glad you did that. I was so excited when you said you actually did it, and you shared that it took forever. So, 6 months.
One of the things I thought, I was talking to Marsha Banks about my CAA and seeing if she
Yes,
could
I
get
love
her.
her. Mm-hmm.
And I thought I should just, now that I've done it, I should like do some free workshops or something to help other people do it. Because I think if, especially every yoga therapy school or even yoga teacher training that has a focus on therapeutic yoga, like, do you know how many people we could impact?
Oh, it'll be a lot. I mean, military
Phenomenal.
and we're not going anywhere. And most of us are or I'll say many of us are entrepreneurial because we have to move from base to base every 3 years.
Right.
Thinking of my cohort mate, Pamela Crane, who was in school with me, and she, she's in California now. I mean, her husband's a Marine.
I did a podcast with her yesterday.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
And she's amazing. And she's, but she's had to, we were the only two people, by the way, the outliers. I'm just going to tell you this story. I digress. But that said, in our program, hey, we need to do online. This was before COVID. We need to do online yoga therapy because military spouses are all over the place. I've had clients in Hawaii, okay, in London, in Japan, okay, because I see military spouses, veteran spouses who just retired and stayed over there. You can't, so I was global before people were saying it. Now, that's because I know the population that I'm serving. And the same thing with Pamela Crane. So they were like, yeah, no, we can't. Nobody was interested in it, really. Nobody was trying to do it. There was no really, they were like, oh, this is interesting. So I, because I'm extra, did one online and then did one in person. And I was comparing what I was doing. It was actually, in some ways for me, it was harder to do the one online because with all the muscle testing and things I was doing in space and creating, some kind of protocol, whether it was yoga nidra or something else, some other meditation, it required a different set of skills but I did it because because I had been doing it. And so then I was able to use my group yoga therapy skills online with military nonprofits. I did that with two. So now, of course, everyone's trying to do it now. And I think that at some point we're going to be, moving away from this COVID era. But I think also that we are looking at hybrid programs, hybrid kind of trainings in education. Like, how are we going to show up for everyone that needs the skills, the things, the gifts, the jewels that we are offering in our trainings, right?
I agree with you 100% because, first of all, yoga teacher training and yoga therapy training are very expensive. If you have to add travel on top of that, especially in the time of COVID, and then hotels and foods, it's just, it prices so many people out. Number two, as you said, like with military spouses, they're all over the place. So they can't commit to, right? So that's our 200-hour training is entirely online because of that. We want to reach military spouses and we know they move all over. So we're just saying it's online indefinitely.
That a lot of trainings had to pivot online.
But I want to stay online. That's what I'm saying. I think even after COVID, I think it can be done beautifully online and then maybe come in, for a weekend or something for the tests and, some in-person, maybe 2 weekends or something. But the other thing that I think a lot of people don't think about when they say, oh, I don't like training online, there are so many people that are not that well in terms of their own autoimmune disease or their own chronic pain. Going to a training and sitting on the floor all day and living out of a hotel, it's unbearable.
Yes. Most
of the people on my yoga therapy training are telling me I'm so much more comfortable in my own bed. I can eat the food I need. If I have a trauma trigger response, I can go take care of myself and get in the bathtub. There are so many positive things about being able to control your space. Yes. And most of the people I work with are introverts. They're highly sensitive people. That's part of the reason they're great yoga therapists. and they actually need that self-care. Our trainings are almost traumatizing to them. So we just need to get out of the box of thinking it can only be one way.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that, I'm excited to work with this anti 200-hour yoga training, which is based in, it's Karen McLaughlin, I believe, but it's based in trauma response, trauma protocols, and social justice. I mean, because that's the way, and there's lots of trainings, yoga teacher trainings out there specifically for different types of trauma as it relates to military or, a substance use or anything else, childhood trauma. I think it's important for 200 hours to address these things, though. I mean, I don't know how you go forward with not addressing those two things, plus really how tangibly, how you're going to make a living, at the thing, which a lot of them, in the past have not addressed any of this. Oh, we're just going to teach you 25 postures and we're going to teach you 3 breaths and we're going to read the Bhagavad Gita. And, not that any of this is wrong, but it's like how, there's stuff that you just can't get to in a 200 hours. So I understand that, which is why you have you have to get the 300 and you consistently do other trainings as you are growing as a yoga teacher. In the yoga therapy space, specifically, I believe, is where I feel like there's more nuance as it relates to the training that we may received, whether it be traumas, how do we respond to triggers? What do we do? And I learned this when I was in my clinic, how somebody is triggered from one-on-one, from a patient-centered service that you're providing, and how you manage that, how you as the yoga therapist navigates that. That requires going back to the whole self of I'm doing my practice. That requires me calling my own self to task, calling myself on my own shit, like, what am I doing? How am I not being equitable, fair?
100%.
And when I use terms like inclusive, am I understanding that implies, oh, there was something that was exclusive, right?
Yeah.
So being mindful of the narrative that we've bought into, that we use, that we kind of regurgitate without fully understanding and embodying what that means collectively. That is why we are consistently at work.
Right.
In the space of healing. I'm
going to take it one step further and say we go through a 800-hour plus yoga therapy program. And of course, we want to go out there and work and sustain ourselves. But the biggest thing that happens in our trainings is that inner self-transformation of figuring out who you are, why you're here, what are your triggers, how do you work with your triggers? Like, there's as much personal development as there is professional development when you have a 200-hour plus an 800-hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think I can speak to, because everyone was like, when I started my yoga therapy journey, they were like, you should just grandfather in, whatever, because I had done so much prior to that. But I was like, I think I missed it by I missed it by 6 months or whatever. And I said, nah, I'm going to see what's going on over here at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. I live down the street, for half an hour. I'm going to see if I can get money, because if I can't, I'm not going to do it. So I got money, I got a scholarship and
the GI Bill.
And the GI Bill. And I went and I learned a lot in that program. I learned a lot more about coaches that I didn't learn. I learned a lot more about, and I will say I embodied, because often we are getting the knowledge and we are learning and we are gaining this knowledge, and we know ways to apply the knowledge. But when I went through anatomy, I could feel I embodied, okay, this is what this means, pronation, this is the supination. I also, what is coming up in my mind as my foot is pronating? Also, what's on my heart as I'm walking and my knees are hyperextended? Really allowing that whole gross to subtle mix of tools that we have in our toolbox as yoga therapists to to really inform what we're doing and how we're moving in space and time, and then how we share that with clients. And that's why at this point, I'm taking clients on referral. I'm not even like, it's on my website. I'm sure you went to my web, like it's there. But if I'm like, who is this person? Which I've gotten, and I'm like, yeah, no. Like, you can say no to a client. That would be my one thing for yoga therapy. You don't have to take every client that comes your way. You don't have to do that. Just, you don't operate from a space of lack. I need this because I need the money. Operate from the energy that you're going to have to expend with this person and the time that you're going to have to put in.
And the connection. Do you feel like you connect? Do you know what I do? I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to. So on my website, there's a place to register for lessons. And I have at the top of it, Amy is not taking clients right now. Now, one is because I'm pretty busy. But the other thing is, I don't want a random person just signing up so I can make a buck. Like, no, we need to talk. We need to decide if we're a good match. This is going to be a vulnerable journey together. So if somebody sees that and they still email me and start a conversation and say, here's what I want to do. And I just had someone calling about military sexual trauma, by the way, and says, and here's why I want to work with you. And then I'll get on a call with them, an exploration call, and see if it's a match. I mean, to me, the intimacy required, the emotional, spiritual intimacy required to do this deep work matters. You have to have a good match.
You have to, and they have to be on board. I mean, I do discovery calls, but I also have something on my website where it's like, you need to fill a little bit of stuff out. Yeah. Like, and then when I see that, because I can glance through that real quick, like a Google Doc or something, I'm like, yeah, no. And then I'll
what do you do then? Do you say I'm booked?
I can refer you. Okay. See, this is where yoga therapists also need to get. You don't have to, and I see this in forums, and I don't know how you feel about this, Amy, and maybe I shouldn't say this. I'm going to use your terms, but I'm
we're just telling all our secrets,
telling all our business. But when we're on social media and we're in these yoga therapy forums, and I see people, I have this client, I might have this client who can do A, B, or C. What would you do for A, B, or C? And I'm like, you need to refer that client to somebody. I refer people. I mean, I've had people refer me to because they knew this person. They're like, well, I know you work in this space, so I'm referring. What is the problem? Refer that person. You don't have to take that client on. And to me, that's lack energy. And that's where we have to retrain ourselves here.
And lack of integrity.
Right.
Part of the scope of practice is that you only take clients that you feel confident with. I mean, I can't tell you how upset I get on those Facebook pages when they're like, and they list off the 10 things, a client with these 10 things, and I don't know what to do. I'm thinking,
right. And I'm like, refer. Because even if I tell you, okay, this has been my experience, get this book, get that book. You have to have the skill embodied.
Right.
Embodied. And it doesn't mean you've had to have experienced the trauma.
Yeah.
But I've heard enough military sexual traumas, and I have had enough empathy, plus I'm an empath, so that's a whole nother conversation, right? To understand the nuances of what that entails and what that does to bodies, hearts, and minds. So then I'm coming from that vantage point of how can I work with this person, because this person is going to heal themselves. See, this is the other thing, as I guide them, right? Because I am the conduit through which that they can achieve this. So I see that stuff. I'm like, refer. I'm saying, but then sometimes I just like, let me just leave, because people are giving all this advice and I'm like, they need to not even take this client, but I don't know them. So I don't want people to get upset. People
I am with you 100%. I just
have a client
back away,
and I'm like, it's not even that deep. If I tell people often, if I have 5 good clients, up to 5, okay, by the way, and then I can really work with them. And those people are really going to be dedicated. But I tell people, listen, you coming on here, how much are you willing? What are you prepared to do? This is the client. How much work are you putting in? Because I'm putting in this work, and you're paying for it, but what are you prepared to do when you come here? That's that relationship that we're going to cultivate together. If you're not ready for it, it's fine. I'll refer you to somebody. But that's the energy I'm bringing.
And it is, if they don't do the work, the client doesn't do the work from the inside out, yoga therapy isn't going to
It's not going to work. We're not magicians.
Yep.
Now, I'm good at what I do, but I'm not a magician, nor do I want to be, because that takes up more of my energy and time. I don't want to do that. I mean, maybe I am maybe I do a little magic.
I think you're magic.
Black girl magic, but really, I don't want to if I don't have to. Like, what are you putting in? Right? So that's the energy that I'm working with. That's the energy that I put into any writing that I do, any articles. I'm coming with that light, that illumination, that energy based on where I am in my journey at that moment.
Even for the yoga therapy school that we run, I used to be like all worried about, are we going to get enough students and is there going to be enough money? And then I switched to, no, what I'm providing is special. I'm worth it. And now I'm at the point where you're saying is, will I accept you as a student because you're willing to do this work?
Right.
I'm not just taking anybody there, are you ready for this? And it's just a total mindset. And it's really not about how much money I have in my bank account. It's not like, oh, I started making all this money, so now I can have the mindset. The mindset came first.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear you say up to 5 clients, people are going to say, well, how do you make a living on that? Well, you do retreats and you do workshops. That's and you have a business where you've done many different avenues to connect with people.
And this is basic business 101, where they say diversify. That's what they mean. You can have in your mind, this is all I want to do. I want to have a yoga therapy practice. Well, I do have a yoga therapy practice. Am I seeing 10 clients a day? Hell no, I don't want to. Okay. But I do retreats. I'm participating in other people's yoga teacher trainings. I actually have partnered through Retreat to Spirit with another friend of mine who's a CIAYT, who has a nonprofit in Baltimore working with Black women specifically. You diversify, you collaborate with other people, you partner with other people, and that's how you can make a living. But you can't put the box in and say, okay, this is the silos, because then that's when the lack energy comes in. I'm only doing this one thing.
Yeah. So
I have to have 20 clients a day. Well, that's why. So you decide what it is you want to do. You may want to write books. You may want to, be a ghostwriter for some yoga teacher. There's so many different things to do that you could use your yoga therapy skills with. It doesn't just have to be a practice. I will be happy and I think this is happening with IAYT, where the expansion of what a yoga therapist looks like, not just working in hospitals.
Yeah.
Even as we move to licensure or not, because I know people have their varying opinions. How is that going to show up in the world? That's going to matter for you and me and for IAYT and for other places, because that is going to shine a light on what it is. Even IAYT has been around for years. I've had to say, this is what yoga therapy is. This is what yoga, because of 1, the marketing, right? And 2, where we're going as we move closer into this age of Aquarius. And that's why you don't have to worry about how many students you have anymore, because that energy is abundant energy. That's the energy that we're cultivating in our practices if we are diving deep.
And what you're really talking about, Pamela, is having the embodied self-confidence to value who you are, value what you do, know that you bring it, know that you can help people cultivate deep, deep change. That's what I was talking about as a yoga therapy degree is professional, but it's also personal. Because if you haven't felt the kind of confidence that you're bringing to this podcast today inside the cells of your body, you won't be able to do workshops. You won't be able to do retreats. You won't be able to get private clients.
Right.
And I've seen it. It's really sad because the personal transformation didn't happen. And maybe you had that before your yoga therapy program, but I think there's opportunity within a 2 to 3 year program to start out with self-doubt, not knowing who you are, what you want to do in this world, and why you're valuable. And through the course of your studies, come out the other side and be a Pamela Stokes Eggleston.
I did have these, awakening before my yoga therapy program, because I feel like because I had doors slammed in my face, because I sat with that and I was like, why? And sometimes it was, I needed to just go back and research and do some things. And sometimes it was because I wasn't wanted. and to sit with that among other people who were supposedly yogis and in this wellness space, right? We're all dealing with our samskaras. So I feel like that happened to me before and it happened again. Again, this is a voyage. You know, sometimes I encourage my students, if I'm doing a group yoga therapy or individual, to read Homer's Odyssey.
Tell us why.
We're reading the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads. Yes. Read Homer's Odyssey. Read it, and just read it and see what his Odyssey was and see all the he thought he hit it. Ooh, he had enlightenment and then something went poof. You know, universe was like, I'll see. Do you think you're enlightened? Let me test you here. Ups and downs in that journey, that jagged road of the voyage that we're experiencing. And so that's what it's been for me. So, you know, long way around to answering that is, yes, I had that before my yoga therapy, but I also had it during, and I also had it after. How am I relating to people? How am I relating to self? How can I show up for, you know, my family, my parents better, my sister better, my brother better, my husband better? How am I showing up in lieu of people who don't have a practice in the middle of that? That's what we're dealing with in this current state of affairs. When I saw the January 6th insurrection, I don't know what they're going to title it in the history books if they don't try to not put it in the history books, okay? Which is a whole nother conversation that we don't have time for. The January 6th insurrection, I saw a whole bunch of people scared to death of the change that you inevitably energetically feel. You may not be able to put a name on it. We in this space know what that is. This is the illumination. This is the transformation, this transformative embodied space that we are currently inhabiting is what shows up. Those people were scared. Shit is changing and there is nothing they can do about it. The train has left the station. Let me go here and overthrow this mess because, you know, so-and-so told me and I'm just going to lose my mind, you know, all of this horrible.
Do you think they do know? I mean, I think when I look at it, the horse has left the barn, but I'm not sure that people are admitting to themselves.
I think everybody, whether that spark of illumination is there or not, the body has a little space in the gut that's saying, this shit is changing. How you react to whatever that is, even if you don't know that it's there, like that feeling or sensation, even if you still want to be the racist, you know, jackass you continue to be, that space is still there. And you just don't want to do anything about it. And some people die never doing anything about it, right? And choices are choices. But I also think I do believe that there's evil in the world. So there's some people that are scared and there's some people that are demonic.
I agree.
And sometimes it's a combination and sometimes it's just what it is. And we don't want to say this is the problem I do have with mental health. Well, this person had mental health issues. This sometimes is, no, they knew what they were doing. They're demonic. Okay. I like to quote a movie. I like to quote movies when I'm making my points. And one of these movies is called Unbreakable. Did you ever see that? M. Night Shyamalan. So it was Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson. I'm not going to give it away, but if you've seen this movie, to your listeners,
everybody go watch the movie.
Okay. The end of it, Samuel L. Jackson says, now that you know who you are, I know who I am. I'm not a mistake. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to go into it. But it was, I said, because you have to know who you are, even if you're a domestic terrorist, in which case there's something demonic going on. Okay.
Yeah.
That you're okay with that. And that's it. And there's nothing, that's not my client. Okay. I'm not trying to fix that person. There's some stuff, the horse has left the barn, the train has left the station. How many different ways do we need to say it? Change is upon us. Change is here now. COVID has taught us throwing all this stuff for a loop. The COVID era has said, what are you prepared to do?
That's right. How are you going to step forward with your gifts and your radiance and your illumination? How are you going to show up in the world now?
Yes.
It's time. Each one of us has to ask that question and get serious. There's no more sitting home, twiddling our thumbs, wondering what we should do in the world. It's here. Go do something.
Go do something. Go do something. And it's just, I think it's a magnificent time. It's been horrific, but it's also been a magnificent time to see the horror, to see the beauty in what community can be, the possibility.
Yeah.
But also,
and you've lost a family member,
yes,
to COVID. So I mean, you're not spiritually bypassing here.
No, this is not. This is. I own that. I sat in my anger and my emotions with that, and continue to do that. This is the practice, and this is why things are and both. I can say this has illuminated how people, particularly, and I'm saying Americans, because we politicize everything. Mask, not wear a mask. Do you give a damn about somebody other than yourself? Yeah. And how can I show up in the world in that space? Yeah. Right? That's it. That's what it boils down to. Otherwise, what we think is society is going to crumble. It's crumbling anyway. I mean, that's the change, in my opinion. It's crumbling. Because it's trying to create space for something new. Some people don't want anything new because they have been at the top.
That's right.
Okay. And they don't want this shift.
That's right.
And they're operating from a space of lack. Well, if I inevitably don't have it, then that means somebody else has it. Abundance means that everything is here for humanity. And it's unlimited. And it's unlimited. Abundance is unlimited. And we're talking about humanity here. So these are social structures of what nations or whatever. Humanity is at the crux of what's happening and what's unfurling in this day and age. And as yoga therapists, we need to understand that. We need to really sense that, take stock in that, and embody that.
And I think we could be on the forefront of that. Like, who else is going to take on this charge? I'm not saying only us, but I think it's our responsibility.
Yes.
I don't see how we can be a yoga therapist and be like, well, I don't want to be political and I don't want to get into that discussion. And I just want to help people breathe. Like, what are you talking about? There's no way around it.
You want to help people breathe, but you're not going to recognize that somebody said, I can't breathe. You want to help people to breathe, but you're not recognizing that the breath is literally life and death.
Yep. And that Black and brown bodies are dying from COVID at a way higher rate because they can't breathe.
Right. I mean, this is a breath disease. That this is affect the lung. You think that's an accident? I mean, it's amazing to me. The gifts that we have been giving, the hard, arduous, horrible gift that we've been given to examine how we've been moving through space here and time and in our own selfishness. We imagine self-determination, return to self-inquiry and self-reflection.
And that is yoga.
And that's yoga. That's all yoga.
That's yoga with a little asana on the side.
With a little bit of sprinkled, seasoned with asana on the side. And maybe one day people, practitioners and yoga teachers and burgeoning yoga therapists will understand that fully. That's my hope.
I think with leaders like you speaking out, volunteering your time to be on this podcast, but also getting paid, I hope, very well for all the consulting that you do. We're going to talk about retreat that you're giving in a few months. I think with strong, confident voices going out there and making these points very clearly, the yoga community will have nothing to fall back on. Like they cannot deny what you're saying today. They might not like it. They may resist it. They may defend it. Mm-hmm. But as you said, the structure will fall. And I'm happy to see that the yoga industrial complex, as I call it, has fallen to its knees to Absolutely. Be restructured in a way that is more inclusive, more diverse, includes social justice in every way. I mean, I think it's a beautiful, magnificent time that we're a part of. Mm-hmm. It should have tragic been. As it's been.
Yeah. I mean, what was Gandhi doing?
Yeah.
All these people. And as Martin Luther King went to meet with Gandhi, what did he then do?
Yeah.
This is where we are. whether you like it or not, or whether you're fighting yourself with that sort of internal battle of how you want to show up as it relates to social justice in these times, the work has to be done.
Yep. And as I always said at IOIT, when I got pushed back for trying to help create these changes, well, it's happening if we like it or not. So you can
whether
either
you like it or not, whether
you can get on the train and make it easier, or you can run behind the train. But either way, the train is going.
You can get out of the way. We can say that. We can say, get out the way.
Yeah.
The train has left the station. Move to the side. You are not going to be, if you haven't done that work internally, if you're not willing to change, move out of the way and allow for space for people who are really doing that work, diving deep, to be able to do it, to move things forward. That's it. That's it.
Yep. All right. Well, I know you have a hard stop for your next appointment, and I want our listeners to know how they can connect with you. What do you have coming up in the next few months that they could come be with you, either online or in person? So tell us, what are you doing out there? How can we connect with you?
Well, the first thing I have is a retreat at Blue Spirit in Costa Rica, Nosara, Costa Rica, and that is going to be in January of 2022. And that will be on my website soon, but that is actually at bluespirit.com, I believe. And that's in Nosara, Costa Rica. We're going to do that, I believe, the last week of January of next year. So we're really excited about that.
Tell us about the safety protocols, because I mean, you are very COVID conscious. And I just want people to understand that you don't take this lightly.
Yeah, the safety protocols are amazing. This past January, I was in Costa Rica and I felt comfortable with going because their COVID protocols were in place, masks the whole time. This was before the vaccine. Testing while I was going, rapid testing, spontaneous, whatever testing, thermometer checks, doctor and nurse on staff. And I had to get tested coming back into the country. I felt so much safer than I felt this entire time being in America during COVID. So they're going to have that. They're changing, the protocols are changing. They've recently changed where you're going to have proof of vaccination. Plus they're going to do masks and all this other stuff. They're trying to protect their people. Okay. Right. Folks like us coming in talking about, we don't want to do this or that. If you can't do that, then I understand that, because we've had a couple of inquiries where people don't want to get the vaccine, and I believe in choice. But, these are what people are trying to do to stay in business. And so we're just trying to, it's and both for us. Like, how can we hold space for everyone, right? So that's that. I am participating in something called the Anti-200 Hour. Yoga teacher training that's actually starting in September. My part will be beginning in January of 2022. I'll be talking about some of the issues we talked about today as it relates to yoga, koshas, samskaras, kleshas, self-discovery in a training. And so I'm excited to be a part of that because they're weaving in trauma and social justice in the 200 hour, which is going to be online. So I'm excited to be a part of that as well. In February, we're going to be doing our yoga training specifically around service and leadership, specifically for Black women. So that's going to be a weekend. It's like an 18-hour training. It's a weekend training. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. And I have a couple of workshops that I'm working with LMU actually in December. That's going to be online, talking about these issues. We can't escape yoga in the space of justice as it relates to, even as we look at climate change and climate crises that we are experiencing, and how marginalized folks have been left out of that conversation, for instance. So all of this has a play in the work that I want to do going forward, as it relates to yoga therapy. So,
and what is your website?
My website is yoga2sleep.com. That's yoga, the number 2 sleep.com. My email is yoga2sleep@gmail.com. That is yoga, the number 2 sleep@gmail.com. So you can reach me there. I'd love to speak to you, talk to you. And yeah, that's it.
Well, I just want to thank you for being such a leader in our yoga space, especially. I mean, you've always been a leader, but you've been so outspoken and clear for the last 18 to 24 months. Like, I'm always looking at your Instagram. I'm looking at your Facebook. What is she saying? What is she doing? Because I know that you have contemplated these things deeply. You are a compassionate person, and you're bringing it. I mean, it's awesome.
It's all I can do. It's all I know how to do. Right. So it's in me. That's
it's embodied.
It's embodied. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. And we will get this published in a couple of weeks. So thanks for being here today, Pamela.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I appreciate it. And I miss you.
I miss you too. We got to somehow get together and find a way, because I think our paths are very similar. We have the same way of thinking. And, I think good people want to work with good people. So we have just finished this illuminating conversation with Pamela Stokes Eggleston. And I want to thank her for showing up so kind, so compassionate, so clear, so confident. There's very few people that I've interviewed that can show up so fully themselves in an embodied way and just put themselves out there and be who they are. And as we talked about in this podcast, it's so important to me at our yoga therapy school, the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, that people graduate looking like that, feeling like that, being like that. There is nothing worse than going through 2 or 3 years of training, 800 plus hours in a cognitive way, where you're just thinking through your life from the head up, but you're still not embodied. You still don't know who you are. You still don't know what your values are. You still don't have the confidence to stand up and be you. I don't advertise it in our marketing with the yoga therapy school, but that's a big part of what happens, right? That there's this internal growth, this transformation. And most people come in thinking, I don't need that. I do know who I am. I'm fine. Life is good. And they're very surprised to find that as you study these ancient yoga texts and principles and practices, you become more and more and more embodied. And usually what I see is the most confident people, the ones who have it together, or so they think, the first year, they're going through it from the neck up because they've got this. And there's not a lot of humility. And then we get into our second year where there's, almost a whole year on mental health and childhood trauma and ACE scores and allostatic load and Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. And you can just see the old structures starting to crumble, because there's no way to learn this, to be in Sangha, to have a mentor, to wrestle with this material and not do some self-reflection and start to realize what has happened to you as a human being on this earth, and that it probably has been traumatic and you have pushed through it. And there's a point that most of our students get to where they kind of have this crisis or this breaking point, and they decide if they're going to move forward in this direction or if they're just going to pull the covers over their head and maybe quit, go try something different. It happens because the work, the interpersonal transformation is hard work. And I'm happy to say that most of our students continue on and do push through that uncomfortable sensation and eventually land in their skin and feel again and sense and let the emotions come up and float back out. They learn how to self-regulate, how to mood regulate, how to energy regulate, how to create a lifestyle for themselves based on the principles of yoga and Ayurveda. But that takes time. That takes 2 to 3 years to get through that tunnel and get to the other side where the light is. You can always see the light over there, but it can be a little bit dark in the midst of that tunnel. And I think this is what makes being a yoga therapist and going through training different than some of the other healthcare modalities where you have to cognitively memorize information, regurgitate it for a test, and pass an exam. We do that too, but to feel it, to be it, to embody it is essentially what happens, at least in our school. And I hope that it happens in every yoga therapy school. So that was really interesting for me to just see how she shows up in the world. And that's how I want all yoga therapists to show up in the world. And I think it's possible. And I think if each one of us does that internal work, and then we bring our whole healthy, more healed self, our integrated self with the shadow, with the light, if we can bring that forward into the world and do good work, the world is going to change. You know, I heard a beautiful story from one of my clients a few days ago, and she said that she had been at a retreat. And as the sun was coming up, gaining prana, everyone started to just feel energized because they got up really early and watched the sunrise. And there was this big sheer of rock. And so as the sun was coming up, each of them could see their own shadow on that rock. And the assignment was to feel the energy and to dance with your shadow against the rock. I'm going to say that again. The assignment was to allow the sun to come up from behind. There's a rock in front of you. There's your own shadow, and you're dancing with your shadow. And I think that's what we do as yoga therapists. We learn to dance, to be joyful with our own shadow. So I'm just going to leave you with that because I think it's such a magnificent meditation. You learning to dance with you in your wholeness, joyfully, knowing there's a shadow, knowing that there's hard times, knowing that being human is difficult. I would say if you and I can manage to figure out how to dance with our shadow in a joyful way, I think there's hope for the world. So have a great day, and we will talk next time. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle, and we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.